Let's talk about Trump's speech to Congress. And I am going to try to make this consumable, but it was a yapathon. With it clocking in as the longest presidential address to Congress in modern history, with Trump speaking for roughly 1 hour and 40 minutes. Which, side note, if you're one of the about 300,000 people that watched it live with us on the channel last night, it was great having you. But with it being such a long speech, what I'm gonna do is cover the key points, the highlights, the big takeaways, and obviously I'm not gonna be able to cover every single thing. So with that, I'll say the speech began in typical Trump fashion. He sang his own high praise.
Citizens, America is back. We have accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
And well, of course, it's not unusual for a president to spend some time celebrating his perceived accomplishments. Also, notably, these addresses to Congress, they often lay out an agenda for the year, but with Trump, he spent very little time unveiling new policies. And this is his speech also generally lacked calls for unity and bipartisanship that have been common historically, which is why we've seen many describing it as divisive and partisan with little to no precedent. I mean, you even had a guest on Fox News describing it as the most partisan speech he's ever heard a president give in this kind of setting. Right? And with that, while blaming one's predecessor for the country's problems is also kind of a presidential tradition, he called Biden the worst president in American history, and he also mentioned his name a dozen other times to blame him from everything for the high cost of eggs to drugs and crime. And then, besides Biden, he attacked Democrats in general for standing in his way and complained that they would never applaud his accomplishments, also referring to them as these people, radical left lunatics, and even using his Pocahontas nickname for Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Once again, I look at the Democrats in front of me, and I realize there is absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them stand or smile or applaud. Nothing I can do.
But of course, with all that, we saw Democrats hitting back, right? There had been some debate over the best way to deal with the speech, with people like Maxwell Frost of Florida, for example, arguing, we want to make clear that things are not business as usual. Things are falling apart. Though in the end, we saw a number of different things playing out. You had some top Democratic leaders and others in the party sitting quietly without disrupting Trump's remarks. This also as some skipped the speech entirely. Others, like independent Bernie Sanders, they walked out early in protest. There's also as others in attendance were shouting, heckling, and otherwise trying to express that their opposition went beyond normal partisan disagreement. And we saw some of that kicking off just a couple of minutes into Trump's speech.
We won the popular vote by big numbers and won counties in our country.
With one of the most notable early moments being Al Green from Texas standing up, waving his cane and shouting, among other things, you have no mandate to cut Medicaid. It's something that he just kept doing, and that quickly led to him getting kicked out.
Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
With people on both sides of the aisle going, wow, that's unprecedented. Though there, the truth is yes and no. To be clear, this isn't the first time in recent history that an opposition lawmaker has interrupted a president's address to Congress. With many pointing to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, for example, repeatedly interjecting during former President Biden's State of the Union speech back in 2022. Though notably, they weren't kicked out, and also unlike them, Al Green might now get censured in Congress as well. And then, in addition to that, throughout the speech, you had different interactions. There were moments where Democrats were laughing out loud when Trump said that the era of rule by unelected bureaucrats is over, with the camera feed even then focusing on Elon Musk while people were laughing. Additionally, you had Democrats applauding loudly when he talked about aid to Ukraine and yelling January 6th when he talked about protecting police officers. Right, and all of that was in addition to some waving signs that read things like Musk steals, save Medicaid, and protect veterans. And even those were in addition to things like Rashida Tlaib bringing a whiteboard and writing different messages on it throughout Trump's speech, including no king, lies, and start by paying your own taxes. But in any case, with getting all that part out of the way, getting more into the specifics about what Trump talked about, a good chunk of the speech, it involved Trump applauding his own administration's efforts to roll back transgender rights, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
What I have just described is only a small fraction of the common sense revolution that is now, because of us, sweeping the entire world. Because we're getting wokeness out of our schools and out of our military, and it's already out, and it's out of our society. We don't want it. Wokeness is trouble. Wokeness is bad.
And from there, you had Trump pledging to fight what he described as the economic catastrophe and an inflation nightmare inherited from the Biden administration, with him also claiming that his administration will reduce inflation by lowering the price of energy.
The previous administration cut the number of new oil and gas leases by 95%, slowed pipeline construction to a halt, and closed more than 100 power plants. We are opening up many of those power plants right now. It's called drill, baby, drill.
And then secondly here, he said that the administration would be combating inflation by ending the, quote, flagrant waste of taxpayer dollars, with this making it clear that he fully supported Elon Musk and DOGE.
Thank you, Elon. He's working very hard. He didn't need this. He didn't need this. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Everybody here, even this side, appreciates it, I believe. They just don't want to admit that.
And then with that, he then went on to spend several minutes listing what he described as appalling waste identified by the DOGE team.
$22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $8 million for making mice transgender. This is real. $32 million for a left-wing propaganda operation in Moldova. Under the Trump administration, all of these scams, and they're far worse, but I didn't think it was appropriate to talk about them. They're so bad. Many more have been found out and exposed and swiftly terminated by a group of very intelligent, mostly young people, headed up by Elon, and we appreciate it. We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
Right, and that part, it stood out for two reasons. One, the fact that Donald Trump said that Elon Musk heads DOGE, because like we talked about in the past, the Trump administration had a legal defense that Elon Musk does not actually head DOGE, right, both publicly and to a federal judge, and now you have the president contradicting that. And in fact, we're already seeing reports that plaintiffs in one lawsuit against DOGE have alerted the court of President Trump's remarks last night calling Elon Musk the head of the office. And then two, separate but connected, there's zero evidence that DOGE has uncovered hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud. And this is it's also up for debate whether you consider these programs, which are often mischaracterized by Trump and Musk, as waste. But with that, DOGE itself has claimed to have generated $105 billion in savings. And this, of course, is a figure that they haven't really been able to prove. Because as we've talked about previously, the New York Times notably has found that DOGE has erroneously reported savings based on contracts that have already ended and miscalculated numbers. And in a number of the cases, not by like a little bit. But in any case, right, moving on to another point we should touch on, tariffs. Right, it's obviously a very big topic right now since Trump imposed sweeping 25% tariffs on products from Canada and Mexico, as well as new tariffs on China yesterday. Right, a move that's resulted in many economists warning that a trade war doesn't benefit anyone. And, with that, we immediately saw the markets take a massive hit, erasing a lot of the post-election gains, especially as countries have begun responding with tariffs of their own. But what we saw is that Trump defended the tariffs and warned that reciprocal tariffs would go into effect on April 2nd.
Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries.
You then had Trump going on to highlight some of the tariffs that U.S. products face, such as an over 100% tariff on American automobiles in India, as well as an average tariff in South Korea of over 4 times what the U.S. has on South Korea. But there, we've seen some pushback, with some Indian outlets, for example, claiming that it's not that high, and instead, the highest tariff is 70%, which is still very high for a tariff. And this is you had South Korean officials pointing out that tariffs on American imports are effectively 0%. Right? And then with all that, you had Trump somewhat acknowledging there could be a negative economic impact, but he very much downplayed it, kind of talking about it as a temporary thing, and he continued to insist that it would be beneficial.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much.
One of the notable things here is that you had many members of the Republican Party, long a party that has staunchly supported free trade, applauding the tariffs. Which, really ends up just being one of the things that we're seeing more and more of how Trump has bent the party around him. Which actually, on that note, Republicans in Congress are now working on a massive tax and spending bill focused on clearing the way for key elements of Trump's domestic agenda. And so in his speech, he also went over what he wants to see in that, with the big thing being just cutting taxes.
And the next phase of our plan to deliver the greatest economy in history is for this Congress to pass tax cuts for everybody. I'm calling for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits for our great seniors.
And while saying all of that, also saying that he is going to balance the budget, something that's been described by some as a complete fantasy. Right, and that because it's been reported that the budget framework that we've seen from the Republicans, that would actually likely widen the federal government's budget deficit rather than reduce it. But with, that said, shifting now to foreign policy, we should talk about Ukraine. And as we've talked about before, Trump has recently blamed Ukraine for the war. He called Zelensky a dictator, also yelled at him in the Oval Office, and yesterday he temporarily temporarily suspended the delivery of all American military aid to Ukraine. But notably, in his speech, while he did start off by complaining about how much aid the US has sent, overstating the amount by a couple of $100 billion again, he also dialed back the rhetoric against Zelensky a bit, with seeing him reacting positively to a social media post earlier, which Trump referred to as a letter in which Zelensky voiced regret for Friday's blowup and said he was ready to begin peace talks.
I appreciate that he sent this letter, just got it a little while ago. Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful? It's time to stop this madness. It's time to halt the killing. It's time to end this senseless war. If you want to end wars, you have to talk to both sides.
Also, speaking of international takeovers, Trump restated his desire to make Greenland part of the US, something about 85% of Greenlanders oppose, according to a recent poll. And with that, you first had Trump suggesting he'd respect the will of the people, saying, "We strongly support your right to determine your own future, and if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America." But notably, Trump then seemingly just undermined what he had said when he said that the US will get Greenland one way or the other.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Also, sticking with Trump's territorial ambitions outside the US, he also talked about reclaiming the Panama Canal again.
We didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
With that, he referenced recent news that a Hong Kong-based company has agreed to sell its stake in 2 Panama Canal ports to American as well as Swiss investors, with him pointing to this as evidence that he's already started reclaiming the canal. But of course, we're going to have to wait to see how all that works out, and if it does, whether it satisfies Trump. And then, besides that, of course, there's a whole lot more we could talk about with this speech. Like I said, it was exceptionally long. He had a lot of guests that he was pointing to for a number of the things that he was talking about. And so with that, what I'm going to do is, in the description of this video, I'm going to be linking you to the actual full address to Congress, as well as some consolidated breakdowns of what was talked about, as well as fact-checking articles. Because unfortunately, as usual, Trump made an impressive number of false or at the very least misleading claims if you're interested in that. But where I'm gonna finish the dive into this is by finally talking about the response from the Democrats. Right, and while we saw responses from individuals like AOC and Bernie Sanders, you had Alyssa Slotkin for the official response. She is a first-term senator from Michigan, and she delivered her party's rebuttal from the city of Wyandotte, which notably, as she pointed out, both her and Trump won in November. And so with that, she started her speech by trying to emphasize the common ground that she says still exists between Democratic and Republican voters.
It might not seem like it, but plenty of places like this still exist across the United States. Places where people believe that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should do well and your kids should do better. It reminds me of how I grew up. My dad was a lifelong Republican, my mom a lifelong Democrat, but it was never a big deal, because we had shared values that were bigger than any one party.
From there, you had Slotkin acknowledging that Americans want change, and also saying she was on board with the idea of improving government efficiency and cutting waste, but adding,
"There's a responsible way to make change and a reckless way. And we can make that change without forgetting who we are as a country and as a democracy."
And then with that, she shifted to criticism of Trump, claiming that he hasn't come up with a credible plan to deal with rising prices, and adding that his policies, including tariffs, will actually leave most people worse off than they are now, with the exception being the super rich.
President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life.
And then, in addition to economic issues, you had Slotkin raising concerns about national security, as well as accusing Trump of pitting Americans against one another rather than bringing them together. But then finally urging people to take action to preserve American democracy, including by staying engaged, holding elected officials accountable, and organizing. With everything we just covered, which again doesn't touch on everything in this just historically long speech, I gotta ask, what were your thoughts? Because really, depending on where you go, there are a lot of different reactions. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil, or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple. No coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.